Okay, on this painting, I'm doing watercolor and casein on casein Montval paper. Casein Montval is not 100% rag, so it doesn't have nearly the cotton content that an Arches or a Strathmore Gemini or Langton would have. So it's not as absorbent. The paint will tend to float a little bit on the surface. You'll notice that I also work very vertically, and I do that because that's what I was used to. I came out of a predominantly oil painting background, and I was just much more comfortable painting vertically, and so that's pretty much the way I do most everything. Uh, if you don't want your paint running down as much as you see me very often doing, then you just angle your paper at whatever angle you're comfortable with. I also don't like working much more horizontally. It distorts the perspective. It's just difficult for me to read. So I really like working fairly vertical. Now didn't do any preliminary drawing. I just sort of splattered the background, just got some paint on the paper, and then I began blocking in using a cool green to get the silhouette of the bird. And now I'm working on top of it again, just really trying to get some texture and trying to just get some colors and have some fun with it. I'm not being really random. It may look like it's random, but one thing to keep in mind is that all the colors that you see, even though they're warm colors at this point, they're still in the cool realm. So I'm using a cooler red, a cooler yellow, a cooler blue, that kind of thing. And that way they do relate in that sense. They've all got sort of a bluish tint to them. And I will blow dry the paper to facilitate the process. A lot of people don't like that because it does alter the colors. It'll tend to dull them, but that's okay because I'm going to come right back on top of it and go even more intense. And you can see that I'm using really bright, really intense colors. And I do that because, I again came from an oil painting background, and one of the things you have to keep in mind with any paint, but oils especially, is it's easy to go bright and dull your colors down, but if you start with dull colors, it's really problematic to try and brighten them up because there's always just the undercoating of paint that wants to dull it down. So when in doubt, go bright. And now you can see here again that I'm going in with more intense color and not being afraid to put a body of color down and then throw some other color in on top of it. Now you have to be aware of which colors will blend with others and which won't. Some pigments are, it's not that they're more pigmented, because some pigmented colors really like to gravitate into other colors, but some don't. And I'll be honest, I'm not an expert on all of that. I don't know which ones universally do and don't. I just know the ones in my palette which do. And so I will tend, if I'm wanting to get these real abstract color patterns and shapes, I will go in and grab those first and let them do their thing. I love the way watercolor really works for you. It's a very organic medium, unlike oils and opaque acrylics that what you put down is what you get. So you don't have the paint really working for you. You have to do it all yourself. You can see here where I lifted out the back leg of the owl. And With some papers, that's easier than with others. And with some colors, if it's a high staining color, then it's going to be a little more problematic because it's actually stained the fibers of the paper. Whereas if it's a color that's floating on the surface, then it's relatively easy, especially at this stage where it was a little more damp. Even though I blow dried it, that second layer was still damp. So I was able to very easily lift it out. But again, I'm going to be going opaque with my casein, so it really doesn't matter to me that, if something's showing through. Now I'm using Oriental calligraphy brushes, at least at the beginning block in. I really like them. They're so versatile. You can use one brush to make sharp pointed calligraphy strokes, and then you can use that same brush, put down a little bit of pressure, and you've got yourself a flat. So with one brush you can do a whole lot. And keep in mind that this is being done knowing that since I'm going to go opaque later, that it's okay for me to go too bright and even a little too dark, because I know I'm going to be coming on top of it and modifying it fairly heavily. Right now, this is all still considered the underpainting, and so even though the bird will eventually be much cooler, having all this really rich, warm paint up under there, it's going to show through. And it's really going to make the colors more rich, more diverse, and more vibrant. And that's the thing, if you work, and let's see how to put this. If you put colors down and you want them just to stay the way they are, and it's just going to be I think it'd be called imprimatura, where it's just all done at one time, then you've got to get everything fairly correct from the get-go. But if you know you're going to be doing layering, then you're going to be glazing one layer on top of another, and so you can really utilize all of these bright, rich tones that are up under your final rendering. And it's not a right or wrong. It's just it's a different way of doing it. So just keep that in mind. And seeing what I'm doing here, where I'm lifting off and almost erasing and then coming back and putting something else down, I'm pretty sure that this is casein Montval, because it's just so easily lifted out. You'll notice I've got a pocket watch over to the left, and if you're paying attention to it, you'll notice that the hands don't ever move. And that's because the camera that I'm using, it's not the best camera in the world, and it has trouble focusing sometimes. And so, well, even a really good camera, it doesn't focus on things like paper. So you've got to either put a manual focus in, or have something that camera can focus on. And in this case, what I normally do is I set my camera up, and I will focus it on that watch, and then lock the focus down, and then I'll paint. And every once in a while, if I have to stop, you'll see my arm move over every once in a while, and I'm either getting something to drink, or I listen to books on tape. I listen to lots of sermons and apologists when I'm painting, so I'm always listening to something. And so if something changes, then I'll reach up and go to the next sermon or something. So that's where my arm gets in the way. And of course, that will throw the focus off on the camera if you're on autofocus. If you're on manual, it won't. But there again, if you stop it to get up and go get some coffee or whatever, then when you come back and you turn it back on, there's a possibility you've lost the focus. So that's where I keep that watch there. Now again, I'm using a sable brush to put in the beginnings of details. I'm not sure I would even classify it as details yet because it's still very simple and very broad in its application of details, if you will. I'm certainly not going in and getting every little detail. I'm just like on the wings. I was just trying to get the general pattern, as opposed to going in and counting every feather and trying to get an exact portrait of the pattern itself. If that's something that's important to you, then by all means you can do that. And I do that sometimes. Sometimes I get to where I want to do something really tight, and it's just the fun of going in and getting all that detail. But and I'll approach it very often in this exact same way. You don't have to go in and do this super tight drawing to get a super tight, detailed painting. You can, but you don't have to. One of the beauties of painting the way I'm doing here is that it gives you the confidence that you realize that, you know, if you want to get highly detailed, you can. And if you need to move something around, if you need to change some things, even in watercolor, no big deal. You can just move it and do it, no problem. I'm still doing some lifting. I will say that the Oriental brushes are not very good for lifting, at least not in my experience. They're not really stiff. They're a very soft brush, and so going in and trying to even do light scrubbing, it doesn't work very well. It's really hard on the brush, and it's sort of like trying to scrub with a mop. You just can't do it. So that's where I'll get out other brushes, and I'll use synthetics more for that than I will my sable brushes. The sables that I do have are when they're mostly for when I do pen and ink work, when I'm doing my inking, and they get a real nice point and hold it real well. They hold a lot of paint. And I have a lot, like I said, I have a lot of kinds of brushes, and I encourage you to, you know, I would say buy a lot of different brushes, different kinds, different shapes, and experiment and play with them, because you never know what they'll do. And if you've got something that you're trying to do, one brush, it may be impossible. One brush just may not do what you want it to do, and you're sitting there fighting with it and feeling like you're not a very good painter or you're a failure. And that's not the case. You're just trying to, you know, drive a nail into a board with a screwdriver instead of getting a hammer. So, you know, always use the right tool for the right job. Here I've gone in and I've started using my caseins. Now, once I move over to the casein, I either avoid entirely or I'm really careful using my natural hair brushes. All of my Oriental brushes are natural hair. So casein is it's pretty strong. It's got an ammonia base, and it'll ruin natural hair brushes. So I'm really careful to avoid allowing the casein to touch my natural brushes at all. This is a nice large or mid-size round synthetic brush that I'm beginning to put in. Again, I don't want to say details because it's more I'm refining the shapes that are in the bird that will allow the form to begin to take shape. So I'm beginning to indicate that the roundness of the leg and where the wing is meeting the body, where the tail is meeting the body. Again, I'm trying to refine the smaller shapes within the big silhouette of the owl. This yellow brush is a synthetic of some sort. It's I don't even know the brand, and it doesn't matter. I use lots of brushes. I have some fairly expensive brushes, but I also use inexpensive brushes. It's not how much you pay for the brush, it's just what it can do. I have a friend who's got these watercolor brushes that are, God, they're like $120 a piece, and I don't even like to be in the same room with them for fear of damaging them. I have brushes that are probably $25, $30, maybe about the most I pay. Not that I'd buy $100 brush, I guess, if I felt like it would really do $100 worth of work. But so far for me, my $20 and $30 brushes have done everything I needed to do. Okay, here, look at this. I'm coming in and just boldly putting in color and letting it run down. And what's really nice about using this technique is that it keeps you from getting precious. It's so easy to go in and do a painting or a drawing, and you get terrified that you've done this master stroke, and if you touch it, you're going to ruin it and you'll never get it back, and you've ruined your masterpiece. Boy, that is just putting a ball and chain around your neck and throwing yourself in the river. Don't do that. Be aware that if you make a mistake and you can't fix it, it's because you didn't know what you're doing to begin with. That's not to beat up on you. It's recognize that if you really feel that way, then you're probably either you're underestimating your skills or you just need to improve your skills, so that you're not afraid to go in and mess something up. I remember watching a portrait painter when I was a young student, and he did this really nice face, and then all of a sudden he didn't like the way it was blocked in, so he just took and just covered up an eye and part of the face that he had worked on, and the whole room gasped. He was doing a demo, and the whole room, everybody just gasped, and he kind of turned around, kind of shocked, and was like, what happened? And they were going, "You just covered it up," and he was kind of shocked. He just shrugged and said, "Well, I painted it once, I can do it again," and that really made a great impression on me, because I saw that he wasn't arrogant or anything like that. It's just he painted all day, every day, and he'd been doing it for decades. And so he was really very, very comfortable with painting, with the whole painting process. And he just knew that if he did something and he didn't like it, he could move it, he could cover it up, he could change it. It was no big deal. Now, you don't want to be silly about it. I mean, if you got something good, then leave it alone. But if you got something that's just not working, or it's just not quite what you want, it's so freeing to have the confidence to just jump in and say, well, okay, that was good practice, so I'll go on top of it and see what I can't do. And I'll tell you something else that's really fun. I've discovered that very often fixing mistakes is what makes some of my more successful efforts successful. For instance, like a painting like this, I didn't know exactly where I wanted this painting to go. I knew I didn't want it to be super realistic, but then again, I didn't want it to just be totally abstract either. So I wasn't totally sure where I was going to go with the colors. And so, I began to, I just went in with those real bold warms and reds. And then as I was working, I started cooling it down and trying to get it more in line with something that would be more natural. And so I started, that's where I was like, okay, well, now you're too red. What are you going to do? Well, why not take its complement, green, and just drop it in on top of it? And it's important that you realize that that's how you kind of have to do something like that. You can't just go in and, sort of niggling around, fiddling around, trying to slowly but surely cool it off or transition it. No, no, not especially when you got something this warm. You got to go in and just be bold and drop some color right on top of it and cool it off. If you don't, it'll always look timid and wrong, just wrong. So that's where being bold and jumping in, dropping the color in, and making that bold statement. Let me think if I can remember how it was said. I listened to a teacher, great painter, that he was saying a bad bold statement is better than an okay timid statement. It'll actually look better if you have something that's kind of wrong but it's bold than something that's timid and looks like you just didn't know what you were doing. You were very lacking in confidence. So yeah, just go in and put that paint down, and if you don't like it, put some more paint down. That's one of the things I would tell my students. There's nothing wrong with a painting that more paint won't cure. So, especially this was in oil painting class, where they're sitting there and working with these little bitty puddles of paint, and so afraid to actually get the pigment on the canvas. And I'd grab a whole bunch of paint and just put it on their canvas, and I'd start painting right on top of it and moving stuff around. And it's the same really with watercolor. If you don't have enough pigment on the paper to actually move around and do anything, then it's just, you can't paint without paint. It's really no more complex than that. You cannot paint without paint. So if you're going to paint, put some paint on the canvas, put some paint on the paper. And that's the beauty of things like casein and gouache, acrylic, heavens, even oils. You can take a watercolor, and if you've just run out of your experience or abilities with transparent watercolor, then jump right on top, start moving the paint around with the other. You'll see that I have no problem at all with watercolor or acrylic, watercolor or casein, to use my fingers to move it around, to use my fingernail, soften edges, just move that paint around. Sometimes you'll see my hand, just a part of my hand, sort of block the picture, and that's probably where I've got a hand mirror that you're not seeing the mirror, but you are seeing just a little bit of my hand, and you'll see it kind of pop up. So I'm looking at it in reverse, and oh boy, if you want to see your mistakes, use that mirror. It really will help you. Drawing mistakes, compositional mistakes will really jump out very quickly and give you an indication of where you've made a mistake. All right, well, I think I've about said all I need to say about this. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've enjoyed this episode of The Arthropologist, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see more episodes like this, think about subscribing. I'm Bill Wilson, and I'm The Arthropologist.